Pozdrav dragi narode, dobrodošli u još jednu epizodu Slobodni. Agenda 2030 je današnja tema. Naime, nedavno su napravili sjajan dokumentarac koji se naziva The Agenda, a upravo govori o tome, to je 17 Development Sustainable Goals ili ciljeva za održivi razvoj, kako bi se na hrvatskom reklo. I danas mi je čast predstaviti autore tog dokumentarca kojeg toplo preporučam da pogledate. A danas ćemo kroz emisiju proći kroz glavne teme tog dokumentarca. Čast mi je predstaviti producente ovog dokumentarca, gospodina Marla Shermana and Phillipe Wiseman. Hello Mark and Philip, welcome to our show in Croatia.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, today we'll discuss about your great work, documentary, The Agenda. And I suggest that we start with the introduction. Let's roll first clip.
Ladies and gentlemen, the distinguished author, Mr. Aldous Huxley.
Brave New World is a fantastic parable about the dehumanization of human beings. In the negative utopia described in my story, man has been subordinated to his own inventions. Science, technology, social organization, these things have ceased to serve man. They have become his masters.
Aldous Huxley's novel portrays a dystopian future under the dictatorship of a world state, where every aspect of human life is controlled, from laboratory creation to the grave. He described the story as fantasy, but later wrote, "The prophecies made in 1931 are coming true much sooner than I thought they would. The nightmare of total organization has emerged and is now awaiting us, just around the next corner."
With the rise of brain-computer interfaces and biometric sensors and so forth, all the bodies, all the brains would be connected together to a network, and you won't be able to survive if you're disconnected from the net.
All life on Earth is going to be radically changed.
It's a fusion of the physical, the digital, and the biological world. It's changing who we are.
These people have gotten to the point now where they are openly anti-human.
Everything will be monitored. The environmental consequences of every human action.
They cannot happen without digital ID.
Once the digital ID is in place, it's game over for humanity.
You start your documentary with this sentence. Why?
With Aldous Huxley, having read his book Brave New World, it's uncanny how accurate it seems to be. I mean, as he says himself, he never envisioned it to come true so soon. But he talks about an environment where machines have taken over humans, but more importantly, it's a method of control. And of course, what we also say in the film is that the lust for control is as old as mankind. But now, the people that control us have the tools with surveillance and AI and digital currencies and IDs. They've got the tools to control.
Philip, why you think that these things is very close to us, that this is happening already?
Why Huxley's predictions are so close?
That's right.
Well, it's a very interesting connection with Aldous Huxley, the author of Brave New World, that people might not be aware of, that his brother, Julian Huxley, was the first Director General of UNESCO at the United Nations. And it was actually Julian Huxley in a publication that coined the term transhumanism, which I know we're going to talk about later on. So you could make the argument that Huxley wasn't a prophet. I think he knew what was coming down the pipeline. Was Brave New World a warning, or was it something else? I mean, it seems very prophetic because we're seeing all of these things roll out, but certainly the Huxleys were very much surrounded by the people that seem to be rolling out these measures from supranational organizations.
Maybe that was just formatting, preparing us for that.
Quite possibly.
Because usually before anything happens, there are, say, theoretically, that could happen, and then it's nothing new for us when we saw it happening.
Well, I think Yuval Noah Harari is kind of the modern version of that, where he'll frame things as a warning. Say, look out, this is coming down the pipeline. Or, Henry Kissinger and Eric Schmidt wrote in a book in 2016, The Age of AI, warning about the dangers of AI cognitively diminishing people. But again, if you know anything about those people, I don't think they were particularly worried about. They seemed quite enthusiastic about it. So these things always seem to be framed as a warning, but in reality, they're also told, or we're told, that they're inevitable. These are inevitable changes to society. We have to get used to them, but we're sort of warned about the dangers of them. But it's always framed as an inevitability. And I would argue that if the future that we put forward in the film and we present isn't the future that you want, it really isn't inevitable. I think there's some very powerful interests that would like you to think that it is. But we've got a small window of time, I think, to do something about it.
Yeah. What do you mean by small window of time?
Well, the vested interests that have put these plans in place have done so over decades, and some would even say centuries. And it's very close to coming to fruition. So they're very deeply entrenched and they're very well financed. So I would say if it's possible to start the process of undoing all of the damage they've done through international treaties and obviously all of the chaos we're seeing play out on the geopolitical stage. If it's possible, it has to start, sooner than later, if it's possible to roll it back at all, I would say.
The clue is in the name, Agenda 2030. 2030 is the deadline to get most of these changes in, and we can sense a real acceleration. They're behind at the moment with all their goals, but you can feel, especially in the UK at the moment, the UK seems to be the test base to see how far they can push it. But in all sorts of ways, we can feel this agenda coming to fruition. So when Phil talks about a window of time, by their own timetable, we've got 4 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe we don't have so much time, because even next month, that means October, while we are recording this, will be a very important decision about central bank digital euro in European Central Bank. Let's roll next clip who talking about this.
We are on the brink of a dramatic change where we are about to, and I'll say this boldly, we're about to abandon the traditional system of money and accounting and introduce a new one. And the new accounting is what we call blockchain. It means digital. It means having a almost perfect record of every single transaction that happens in the economy, which will give us far greater clarity over what's going on. It also raises huge dangers in terms of the balance of power between states and citizens.
We are shifting to a new financial system, but the general population is not shifting to a new financial system. It's shifting to a control grid.
CBDC can allow government agencies and private sector players to program, to create smart contracts, to allow targeted policy functions. For example, welfare payment. For example, consumption coupon. For example, food stamp. By programming CBDC, those money can be precisely targeted for what kind of people can own and what kind of use this money can be utilized.
A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations, and also we will have the technology to enforce that.
They're saying we can control with rules. We don't need currency anymore. And so it's no longer a financial system or a currency system. It's purely a digital concentration camp. It's a slavery system.
They are even here confirming big danger for privacy. And they are confirming they can control each transaction precisely. And of course, at the same time, they are confirming it's possible to program this money, how can be used. We know now, because our governor of Croatian Bank said, no, it will not be programmable. Also, he confirmed it will not decline cash, but it can be. That means in 1 second, they can change this decision.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, all of these new ideas, they're sold to us as for being for convenience, to help life, make it easier. And that's fine, except that there is the possibility to use it for control. And once every single transaction you make is digital, and every single transaction you make remains on the record, it's a very short step for them to say, sorry, you can't spend your money on that product. I mean, already in this country, the government are talking about checking if you go abroad more than 3 times. Maybe you have to get permission to go abroad a 4th time. Once you get into a regime of carbon limits, and they say that you can only eat so much meat, or you can only buy so much petrol, or you can only travel to so many destinations, the element of digital currency gives them the control to stop you once you reach your limit. And that's a real danger. It may not come in phase 1, but the point is, it's possible to do it, and it should be resisted.
Yes, and Phillipe, I saw documents in this preparation for central bank digital currencies, and inside they said they will stop possible bank run with limits of 3,000 euros that each one can have on this digital wallet. But also they don't give any guarantee that this will not be changed. That means in any moment they can change and say, not limit is not anymore 3,000, it could be 300,000. And then in that moment can happen that all deposits from the bank went to digital format, and then bank can go bankruptcy. Am I right?
Quite right. I mean, if you look at historically the trajectory of something like contactless payments, that started off as quite a small amount. And then the more that people got used to it and the more they got comfortable with the technology, suddenly that was raised. In the UK, I think it's currently £100, but it's likely to go up further and further. And I think you could sort of mirror that across what's going to happen here, where you started off at a very small amount and encourage people to use it and get used to it. But there's no limitation on the extent to which this can be extended. And I think it's clearly the goal. And it's quite laughable that they say that this isn't going to impact your use of cash when there are multiple initiatives. I mean, Visa and MasterCard in 2017 ran a huge study you might be aware of that basically was pushing for, in that paper, they were advocating for behavioral alterations to disincentivize the use of cash, or at least make digital payments as easy or easier than using cash. So there's a lot of behavioral psychology in the background pushing people away from cash. And there's also the United Nations Development Programme has an offshoot NGO called the Better Than Cash Alliance, right? And they say that we're not trying to replace cash, but their name is literally the Better Than Cash Alliance, and they're calling for responsible digital payments, right? It's clear this is the direction of travel. And it's only, I think, that they want to get the younger generation especially familiar with the technology so that they can nudge people away from using cash. And then eventually they'll just claim that it's untenable. I think that's the idea, that so few people are using it, it's just not worth it. But they're trying to get, if there are any means necessary, an onboarding into a digital payments infrastructure.
And we see at the same time decreasing of cash machines around. Even 15% was decreased in just 1 year in Croatia. And also there is a database. And now in this organization, database will be in the corporations, not in the government. And nobody can guarantee you that this corporation will not use this database and sell it somewhere.
Well, this is also the concern that it's one thing for the current government or a current administration to say we've got no intention of using the technology this way, because if the potential is there, what safeguards are there down the line to say that it wouldn't be used for those things or be expanded into those areas? It's very much a Pandora's box. We can't. Once this is rolled out, it's only going to expand. That's the only direction of travel I see for it. It's not going to be rolled backwards. And that's the case with so many of these sustainable development goal policies. I mean, Melissa, I think in the finance section, I don't think it was in the clip that you rolled, she said it's a ratchet system. And it's very much that. It only moves in one direction. It won't go backwards. So you have to sort of fight it where you meet it, or it will keep encroaching on your life.
Yes, and Mark, I was looking for answer for what is the advantage of central bank digital money, what we have with this, what we don't already have with existing digital money. And I couldn't find any answer except huge cost for implementing this.
Yes, but the takeout from this is that they have the technology and the wherewithal to create a situation where they decide what you can spend your money on. That's the biggest danger of all. Whatever it costs, you will not be able to control what you spend your money on and how you live your life.
Yes, and they said everything is for our better world in the future. And this world they're calling 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Let's roll next clip who is talking about this.
Surprisingly, the blueprint for transformation is woven into the United Nations Agenda 2030, ostensibly a vision for a better world.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I say again that taken together, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Climate Agreement provide humanity with a master plan for a sustainable way of life on this planet.
New York City, late September 2024, the setting for the United Nations Summit of the Future, a gathering of member nations to reinforce and accelerate Agenda 2030 and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. The plan has a broad spectrum and is full of worthy ambition. But behind those deliberately bright and colourful boxes lies a darker theme, a shifting of influence and potentially power towards unelected world bodies. The strategy goes back well into the last century, and pressure is growing, because the goals are far behind targets set at the grand relaunching in 2015.
17 inspiring Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Our aim is clear, our mission is possible, and our destination is in our sights.
To end poverty and hunger, address inequality, protect our planet, and build a life of dignity for all.
It appears to be a noble and ambitious program for a perfect world. And who could argue with those aspirations? But critics insist the goals are not what they seem. Alex Newman is a journalist and broadcaster who's been investigating the issue for 15 years. He has his own way of interpreting the rhetoric.
You have to learn to speak what I call UNEs. You have to know what the terms mean if you want to truly understand what is being discussed. When they talk about peacekeeping forces or the peacekeeping role of the United Nations, they're actually talking about the war-making capabilities of the United Nations. So you have this Orwellian doublespeak. When they talk about transparency, more often than not, they're talking about eliminating your privacy. Human rights is another very, very good example. They make very clear in this document that your rights can be restricted under the guise of public order or morality or whatever the case may be. And so they're saying, here's your rights, but by the way, they're not really rights. We can revoke them at any time. The UN is filled with contradictions like this. Like, for example, when they talk about gender equality, right? A normal person in the Western world thinks gender equality means a woman has a right to earn money, to own property, to have all the rights and privileges that a man would have. When you look at the individuals who lead this movement within the UN, you're talking about radical feminists. You're talking about people who are very interested in dissolving the nuclear family. As you dig into these goals, it's very clear we're dealing with something far more nefarious. Once you look past the marketing slogans, that kind of warm and fuzzy, we're going to end hunger, which again is just window dressing, you realize that this is actually a blank check for totalitarian global control.
Well, these goals sounds great. Who doesn't want to fight poverty or hunger? But is this maybe some kind of Trojan horse for something else?
Well, that's right. I mean, all of 17 goals are on the face of it to create a better world. But when you look beyond the flowery language and the colourful pictures, it all depends on everything, resources, finance, people being controlled centrally. You're talking about an organisation which is not democratic and not democratically elected. So the public have really no say in what the United Nations policy is. And the influence from corporations and individual billionaires with a vested interest is quite clear to see. It is not a coincidence that all of the countries together are going down the same path, certainly in the Western world, because they're all following these United Nations goals. But what it leads to, whether they say it or not, is a world government and world diktats on how you should run your country. I mean, they are not interested in different countries, different nations, pride in your nation. They are trying to iron everything out. And you look at the European Union, who are working in tandem with them, and the WEF, who are working in tandem with them. It's all about central control and profit for the main corporations. The shift away from any illusion of democracy is quite terrifying.
Philip, Alex Newman is talking about some special kind of language, UN language. That's some kind of new normal. We know now that we have some new normal now, but it's this different kind of languages. Why? Just a second, we don't hear you. Okay, repeat.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. So Alex refers to it in the film as UNEs, which is essentially the outlining of ostensible reasons, because when you look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, they map across every facet of society. So you're essentially giving the UN and its surrounding organizations power and influence over every aspect of society. And this is, Alex refers to it as a blank check to sort of control and transform. I mean, they literally say that Agenda 2030 is the blueprint to transform the world in their vision. But these are ostensible reasons. That's the important thing, because on the surface, they all sound wonderful and they're very hard to argue with. Who wouldn't want a world with no poverty and no hunger? But if you look at, again, the trajectory of the United Nations since these goals, initially they were presented as the Millennium Development Goals, and then in 2015 they were updated into the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. What is the state of hunger in the world? Has it got better since we've piled billions across the world into this initiative? What is the state of global conflict in 2025? What is the influence of the United Nations? I would argue that it's not a net positive if you to actually look at the figures on this. And to Alex's point, they don't mean what they say they mean. I mean, if you had historically a relatively small number of people that wanted to exert domination and control over the majority of people, it would be suicide, right? So we're going now towards this sort of digital prison, because technology is the great equalizer for the few. So they need us in this sort of digital entrapment. But in order to get us there, they need to talk us into our own prison, right? So they're manufacturing your consent with these wonderful utopian ideas and trying to get countries to sign away national sovereignty. And they've been quite successful over the years, for decades, in doing that. But it's all about manufacturing the consent of the majority to have their lives more deeply encroached upon.
Last year, in September 2024, we signed in the United Nations Pact of the Future. And in this document said that in case of emergencies, and there's a different kind of emergency, and they can say what is emergency, we will give our sovereignty to United Nations, and they will make a plan how to deal with this emergency.
Yeah, well, I feel very reassured by that, don't you?
Yeah. Well, we had one huge experience just a few years ago, and it was called pandemic. And one organization has a big influence on this. It's calling WHO. And we signed also international health regulations already last year. And this year was new treaty. It was not finished yet because they need to exchange something, and they call it PUBs, what they need to exchange. But it's in front of us. Let's roll next clip.
Be aware then of the World Health Organization, the UN's most powerful agency. Since COVID, the WHO has sought to increase that power to unprecedented levels through amendments to its pandemic treaty and the international health regulations. A key driver is its One Health initiative.
Well, can you tell me what was our experience, for example, your experience in the United Kingdom with the WHO during pandemic?
Do you want to take that one, Mark, or shall I take it?
Yes, Mark.
Actually, yeah, I'm not sure we felt it, Andrija, during COVID. I think the awareness of the WHO was not so great. I think we referred most things back to our own government. I mean, it's transpired latterly that, it was no coincidence that so many countries took precisely the same
measures,
pattern of act, whether it was lockdown or masks or school closures, and then of course came the injections, the so-called vaccines. So I think we at the time didn't really looked towards the WHO very much. What's emerged since, of course, is we've realised how coordinated the whole thing was. And that's what they want to do going forward. They want to dictate to the world what's a pandemic, what's a suitable treatment, etc., etc. But of course, you're deeply suspicious when the vast majority of funding for the WHO comes from pharmaceutical companies who have a vested interest, clearly, in rolling out vaccines and making money. The other thing is about when you have a world decision maker and they make one decision, if that decision's wrong, the whole world suffers. So by centralizing everything, you're taking away learning about best practice and things that do work and don't work. There are many people in the medical world who think it'll be a disaster if all decisions come from a central source. And of course, when it's linked to AI, they'll be collecting data on every person and dictating how treatments come along. I mean, the WHO, I'm sure, still does some very good work, but I don't think it's their job to dictate to every country what's right for their population.
Yeah, they call it One Health, and for sure, if everybody takes same measures, that means we don't have control group. Maybe that was their attention, but they used pandemic to change this treaty, and they tried to increase their power. They did not succeed with the treaty yet, but with international health regulation, they did. And even United States decided to leave WHO because of it.
Yes, well, I wish we would leave it as well. It can only end badly, I feel, for the WHO.
Well, this...
If you were really cynical, you would say that the pandemic was created to create a problem and the solution is power to the WHO. And we are seeing that increasingly, and I think you're going to go on to climate change, but you can see how situations are created so that the problem is there and the solution is needed, and that solution always goes back to central control and central decision-making.
From a side of unelected bureaucrats.
Correct.
And I want to talk about one organization who is totally unelected, but they signed a contract with UN to help in implementing sustainable goals, Agenda 2030. And this organization is WEF, World Economic Forum. Let's roll next clip.
Control, dictate, eliminate debate, the hallmarks of a totalitarian regime. And nowhere is the cold ambition of corporate dominance more evident than with the World Economic Forum. Klaus Schwab founded the WEF in 1971. His mentor was Henry Kissinger, statesman, political shaper, and close confidant of the Rockefellers. The organization now employs 800 people and has programs in business, academia, and in training future global leaders. It's far more than its famous annual meeting in Davos.
Over the last 50 years, the World Economic Forum has blossomed into an enormously influential organization with all of the major corporations as stakeholders or trustees and all funding the World Economic Forum to ultimately fund the UN World Government Plans and Agenda 2030.
Klaus Schwab is the public face of stakeholder capitalism, a planned system of central ownership and control that has little to do with democratic process and is uncomfortably close to communism. It's a partnership between global corporations, governments, and what Schwab refers to as civil society, NGOs, and so-called think tanks. The agenda is driven by finance, which gives the unelected and unaccountable oligarchs huge influence, if not control, over policy. The UK's Prime Minister, himself a one-time member of the Trilateral Commission, has already declared his interest.
You have to choose now between Davos or Westminster.
Davos.
Why?
Because Westminster is too constrained. And, you know, it's closed and we're not having meaning. Once you get out of Westminster, whether it's Davos or anywhere else, you actually engage with people that you can see working with in the future. Westminster is just a tribal shouting place.
How is it possible that some organization can organize each year summit where all world leaders coming, elected leaders, And they are not elected from anybody. And even they signed a contract with UN to implementing something what are official policies from the countries. That means that looks like they are running the show. Even your present prime minister impossibility to make decision between Westminster and Davos, he chose Davos.
Yes, that's a famous quote. The whole premise of WEF is stakeholder capitalism, which is a merger of big business, state control, and what Klaus Schwab, when he was in charge, used to call civil society. But of course, civil society is think tanks and official organizations, which are by and large funded by big business. So again, it's a cutting out of the ordinary person and a cutting out of any democratic influence. You have to go back and look at the whole way the world works, and it all comes down to finance, whether it's the world banks or the big corporations themselves, or investment asset companies like BlackRock. They're all the same people, interrelated, and they are exerting incredible tightening control over world affairs.
Chief of the BlackRock, Larry Fink, is presently president of WEF New One. And how is it possible that, again, I know that 70 years ago, there was one system called fascism, where corporation and government doing together to run the show, to run all policies. Now we are seeing something similar. How is this possible 70 years later?
Do you want to take that, Phil, or do you want me to answer?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, Phil.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so I mean, I would argue that that's exactly what it is. Just because you put it under and put a new bow on it and call it stakeholder capitalism, effectively what that involves is, I mean, they claim it's giving everybody a stake in the environment and sort of the global commons. But actually, if you were to say you're on a level playing field with global institutions and transnational corporations, what sort of a stake does an individual have compared to an organization like BlackRock? I would argue that BlackRock would completely outweigh the will of the people in that sort of structure. And I think we've already seen that. I think, what poses for democracy in our country at the moment, clearly the will of the people is being superseded by the influence of big money and transnational corporations and NGOs. I think no matter where you look, there are decisions being made that generally do not reflect the will of the people. They're coming from on high. And I think that's what this arrangement is. It's a formalizing of it and an attempt to call it something new, but it is fascism. I mean, it's quite hard to put a label on it because there are elements of it that sound like communism also. So it's a very clever sort of merger of, essentially, it's an authoritarian system. I mean, Richard Jeffs, who's done some work in this area, refers to it as a global authoritarian political system, stakeholder capitalism. And I think that's a fairly accurate assessment.
Yeah, Richard Jeffs is my also guest, and we talked about stakeholder capitalism. Yes, Mark, you want to say something?
Yes, when Keir Starmer was quite new as the Prime Minister of the UK, two of his visitors to Downing Street were Bill Gates and Larry Fink to discuss policy. Now, despite several freedom of information requests, they will not tell us what they were talking about. I mean, it's a cementing of everything that Starmer said about Davos over Westminster. But of course, Larry Fink and BlackRock, I mean, they've influenced all kinds of elements of society because through investment, they stopped investing in companies that weren't diverse or weren't playing the right carbon neutral policy. They were dictating policy by not investing in companies. I mean, we've seen a huge change in this country in diversity, whether it be race or gender or transgender. We've seen a pushing of all this because companies are introducing set percentages of employment of different categories. Because if they don't get the investment from people like BlackRock. It's a very heavy influence, all based on money.
To unite people about something, you need a common enemy. And there they find the common enemy, and it's mankind itself and CO2. and they call it climate changes. Can we roll next clip?
(2024) with the hottest day on record and the hottest months on record. This is almost certain to be the hottest year on record. And the masterclass in climate destruction.
Statements such as that are amplified by emotional footage from all over the world. But is any of it true?
I do not think there's a climate crisis, and I base that on all the evidence and the climate data sets that we build to answer questions just like that. We actually use satellites to monitor the global temperature, the true global temperature of the atmosphere. And we find there is a rise. It's about 1.5 degrees per century, which is certainly something that's manageable and the Earth has seen before. Compared to the 19th century, which was about the coolest century in the past 10,000 years, we're warmer. But we're about the same as we were 1,000 years ago, and certainly cooler than we were about 5,000 to 8,000 years ago.
John Christie is a highly regarded climate scientist who developed the measurement of accurate temperature records using satellites. His evidence is critically inconvenient to the climate change industry.
I'm not popular in most of the climate community, that's for sure, because much of the climate community depends on climate model results. Tens and hundreds of millions of dollars have gone into that industry of climate modeling, and I show, well, you folks have failed. But yet they prop up the entire political world that tends to support this. In 2017, I came to work and there were 7 bullet holes in our office suite. And so some people are pretty upset that the evidence that we build and show that can stand the test of time and can stand up to cross-examination is just not going along with their issues and their desires.
Well, I had some guests also. One of them was Judith Curry, and she was a member of team who made a new climate report from Department of Energy of United States. And this new climate report, they're saying it's not that bad as they state, especially in these 17 sustainable goals. Is this kind of, I don't know, because at the same time United States decided to leave Paris Agreement. Is this again some propaganda, or is there a really big threat from the climate changes?
Well, the problem is, Andrija, it's all based on computer modeling and looking into the future, and we all know that these are very rarely accurate. If I said before that if you were cynical, you would take the pandemic as a problem that needed a solution, and definitely climate change has been used as a common enemy to force all kinds of policies through and change economies of nations. Look, there is no doubt that climate is warming up slightly, but our expert in the film, Professor Christie, who is a very clever man who does satellite monitoring of temperature. He argues that 1.5 degrees maybe it is warming, but there are many, many reasons outside of carbon dioxide that could be causing it. The nature itself changes the climate, and in fact, only 9,000 years ago, the North Sea between England and Europe was land, and in the period in between, I think the sea level has risen something like 135 meters. But that was the ending of the Ice Age. It had nothing to do with carbon dioxide. It's just natural change, and the Professor Christie also points out that if you look at the history, the warming of the world, the increase in carbon follows the warming of the world by about 500 years. It's not the other way around, as they're trying to show. Plus, of course, carbon dioxide keeps everything alive. Market gardeners in the UK, they pump carbon dioxide into their greenhouses to make things grow. And we are seeing at the moment a real increase in greening in the world, even according to NASA figures. So it's a very complex argument. But there is no doubt that a great dollop of it is propaganda to suit those who would change the world. There is a big difference too between caring for the environment and keeping the seas clean and generally looking after the world. But that's not really what this is about. This is about man-made climate change blamed on greenhouse gases And on the back of it, there is a massive economic shift, which is working its way down to the public in the UK. I mean, our energy prices at the moment, because we're so gung-ho on wind turbines and solar panels, our energy prices are the highest in the world, I think. It's making it very hard for people to heat their homes and heat water and even cook. I mean, it's a very false policy, but it's, again, if you're cynical, you look at it all and say, right, it all points back to a change in control. And as Phil will tell you, it goes back decades.
Philip, all plans in Agenda 2030 are built around climate change. That means this is a pillar stone of the whole story. What if it's not truth? What if this story is false?
Well, even that in itself, I think a lot of people's perception, if you were to ask the man on the street, what is Agenda 2030? If people know at all, they'll say, isn't it something to do with combating climate change? And the truth is, one of the Sustainable Development Goals out of 17 expressly mentions climate change. I think there's goal 13, which is climate action. Almost every other facet is involved with transforming society. Again, you have this manufacturing of consent, and people think, oh, this is a wonderful thing to protect the environment and to preserve nature. Actually, no, it is a blank check to transform society in the image of global institutions and to usurp power and subvert nation states. That's what it is, under the guise of saving the planet. And as Mark points out, it's been deliberately conflated over time. Because true environmentalism, I think most people, again, is what they have in mind: the protection of wildlife, creative reuse, recycling, not excessive waste. These are all things that most of us can agree are good things. But what this is actually doing, and has been systematically doing for more than 50 years, is deindustrializing, particularly Western countries. This concept of degrowth, which was introduced by the Club of Rome, right, with overtly stating that they recognized that the middle classes were a problem. All right, so you have these sort of industrial giants at the turn of the last century, Rothschild, Rockefeller, Carnegie, etc., that saw that there was out of the industrialization era, grew a new class of people, the middle class, and they thought that they were not as malleable as they liked. And how do we bring them under our control? Well, you need to stop them getting so affluent. Essentially, that's what this is about. It's ring-fencing wealth and ring-fencing power into the hands of a so-called global elite. And everything that you're seeing in the 2030 agenda is window dressing to do just that, I would argue.
And energy is one of the most important things to control narrative. And energy is the topic here. Even we're now fighting some wars where is energy in the middle of it. War between Ukraine and Russia, and we know that we are suffering hard because of it. They are telling us that because of it. But let's roll next clip.
If you cannot set a credible course for net zero with 2025 and 2030 targets covering all your operations, you should not be in business.
Well, net zero is insanity. It's pure insanity. I mean, the idea that you can remove 85% of the world's energy, which comes from hydrocarbons, within less than 30 years and replace it with the sunbeams and the breezes. It shows a complete lack of economics, societal effect. It shows a simple lack of the progress that we made over 300 years.
Well, energy is very important, and you're telling that you have a crisis there because of renewable energy, because of wind turbines. But for sure, wind turbines, are they really renewable energy, or there's something else behind? Mark?
Well, I know that they're ruining the landscape in the UK. I mean, areas of Scotland, Wales, beautiful part of Cornwall, they've now got wind turbines everywhere. And also lots of our coastline have got huge wind turbines, but they're not particularly efficient. They don't work. Obviously, the wind doesn't blow all of the time, but when it does blow, strangely enough, it creates too much electricity, and the existing infrastructure, the infrastructure cannot cope with all the extra power, and it's actually costing money to deal with that, and they had to shut various grids down. But of course, the damage it's done to the environment isn't really mentioned in the campaign. I mean, whether it's at sea where it's still life, or whether it's on land where it's killing all kinds of birds and other creatures, it's counterproductive. And of course, we've also got solar panels, and they're hugely inefficient because they only work when the sun shines, which isn't this summer apart. It's not that often in the UK. It's a political move. None of the economics add up. I mean, what they say it's going to cost is a fraction of the real cost. I mean, even last week, an independent body in the UK said it's going to cost something like 800 billion to reach net zero. But I mean, our estimates go far beyond that. I mean, we think it'll run into trillions. Because, what'll happen, I think, and I think one of our experts in the film says, is that there won't be enough energy to go round. So they will have the power to shut it off at certain times, and we won't have any electricity. They're already working on, you can have a smart meter now where if you work it at the weekend, you get cheaper electricity. Well, that technology can also shut you off. And ironically, of course, this comes at a time when we're using masses more electricity for electric cars, for one, but mainly for surveillance, which is now all over our country, and these huge data centers, which are drawing massive amounts of power at a time when production is going down. It's all very false.
Phil, is it possible to replace with renewable energy? We are now talking about artificial intelligence, and they're implementing, and that takes lots of energy, and they still cannot replace it with new energy. And is that have any sense?
In our film, and in fact, there's a document that we refer to by a government-sponsored body called the UK Fires Association. They published a document called Absolute Zero, in which they acknowledge that net zero targets are untenable, and therefore we'll have to quarter our electricity consumption in the UK. So 75% reduction by 2050 in order to have any hope. So it's, how much of the country is on board with that? I mean, what this stuff necessitates ultimately, and what it's really about, as Mark was saying, it necessitates the smart grid, right, in order to take account for all of this sort of intermittent energy production. A smart grid, which goes back to the days of the original technocracy movement in the 1930s, when they needed to be able to account for every unit of energy and every means of food, every item, every means of production needs to be accounted for. And that's, that vision seems to have been sort of brought back to life and resurrected by people like the Trilateral Commission, and has been sort of integrated into the plan. We're seeing technocracy, I would argue, being rolled out on a global scale, where that's what the surveillance is about. Nothing comes in or out of the closed system without them knowing about it.
Beside energy, there's one more important thing, and it's food. Let's roll next clip.
Farming has been at the heart of our lives for generations. But to the climate change advocates, suddenly it's a threat.
A lot of people have no clue that agriculture contributes about 33% of all the emissions of the world. You just can't continue to both warm the planet while also expecting to feed it. Doesn't work.
One thing John Kerry didn't mention was that farming and agriculture contributes 100% of the food that we need to eat. So that's a little kind of an important detail that he ought to have mentioned. And I think what we're dealing with here is actually a global war on agriculture. I believe they are demolishing our food infrastructure, partly to cause a crisis, right? And I guarantee you, mark my words, we're going to be in a food crisis, and they're going to say it's climate change.
No farmers, no food. I had a guest, it was Andrew Bridge, and we talked about crisis of food in United Kingdom. They want to decrease food supply because 30% of emission is food. Mark.
Talk about food. I mean, all of these crises have something in common, but COVID or climate change or whatever, they all play on people's fear to start with. It's a sort of double hit. They play on your fear, play on your conscience and your care for the common good, and they get people to do what they want to help solve the problem. They might come a cropper with food because food is essential to everybody's life. And already we're seeing a huge increase in prices in this country. But our land is under threat from First of all, as we've talked about, wind turbines and solar panels, particularly solar panels on farmland. You can see them everywhere you travel, like acres and acres of solar panels. So we're losing farmland, but also under the threat of, as part of the United Nations regeneration plans, we are rewilding a lot of land as well. There are plans to rewild huge areas and prevent farmers from growing crops. And then, of course, there is the value of farmland and forest land to offset carbon. This scheme whereby if a company is using, let's take British Airways for an example, or any airline, they're using a lot of carbon, and so they have to offset it. So they're buying land and forest land, and they're just leaving it, and they say because it's absorbing carbon, they can offset that against what they're using. So more and more land is being used up. But I think almost the key point for me was, I don't know whether that was in the clip you just played, but Catherine Austin Fitts basically points to the fact that they want to kill off all of the small farmers so that everything goes through big corporations, and they want you to use more lab-grown meats and insect flour and insect foods. Because as she says, if they can control all of that, they're controlling the whole food supply, and every dollar spent goes to their bottom line. Again, it's as Phil been saying, it's about this central control, but it's channeling all of the production into a central place, and they're making the money. But I will tell you now that, in this country, and I'm sure Croatia's the same, we enjoy our food too much, and there would not be a great welcome if we have to eat insect food and lab-grown meat. I think it's one bridge that they may find more difficult to cross.
Philip, I saw that they're offering artificial meat, 3D printed meat and artificial food. At the same time, BlackRock is buying 13 billion hectares of very good agricultural land in Ukraine. And I don't think that they will produce artificial meat there or any kind of artificial food. For me, that doesn't make any sense.
No, and Ukraine, of course, it's interesting the conflict that's been playing out there because it's historically been known as the breadbasket of Europe. It's a huge food exporter across the world. You asking, are they planning to make natural food there, and for what end?
Of course. What else they're planning to do there?
Well, if on the one hand, you have consolidation of that power, because even if there is natural organic food grown there, it's sort of falling under their jurisdiction, isn't it? It would seem to be that they seem to be vying for a two-tiered society where if things continue on the trajectory that we're on at the moment, most working class people might not be able to afford the sort of food items that they want. And so they may be nudged onto artificial foods, particularly when things like carbon pricing come in and you're given a carbon allowance. It might be that a lot of the diet that you have currently is untenable, and so you're sort of forced financially onto some of these very questionable, be they lab grown or plant based or just meat alternatives, and these lab grown foods. I mean, I saw recently Bill Gates has attached his name to a lab grown butter. So this sort of attack on meat and dairy, which is just it's just lunacy. I think if anything, Bill Gates has probably got a future in the diet industry, because nothing puts people off their food quite like seeing Bill Gates' name attached to something.
Well, for implementing all of these things, they need acceptance from people, for sure. They cannot force it. And for that, they need indoctrination. Let's roll next clip.
All aboard for global goals.
This year, Thomas and his friends have teamed up with the United Nations.
The world of young children is supposed to be one of innocence and joy, but it's been permeated by the global ideologies of the United Nations.
If you go to goal number 4, it deals exclusively with education. And when you think education, recognize they're talking about indoctrination.
The Sustainable Development Goals.
under the surface of it all is this effort to bring all the children of the world into this one world globalist system. And what's so remarkable about this to me is that it's not even hidden anymore.
Take part in the global movement
to save our world from being destroyed.
How will you fight climate change?
Try meat-free meals. Reduce your electricity use. Give your clothes a second chance.
And you can never ignore Greta.
The eyes of all future generations are upon you. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you.
Lenin said, "Give me one generation of youth and I will transform whole world." And it seems that they are following this. They took children and they are trying to indoctrinate them for these 17 sustainable goals. Mark, what do you say?
It's very obvious that the education system in the UK has been controlled for a long time. I'll give you an example. If the children are taught about man-made climate change and they're scared to death that the world's going to end, and they have to go along with it, and then when they come to take their exams, that's what they have to say. You know, the children will not pass their exams with any decent grade if they don't go along with the narrative, and that is just mind control. It's the same with diversity on all kinds of issues. The policies that we've seen coming down from world level are embedded in our education, and they're also very keen, it seems to me, to cut parents out. You know, they're very keen to say that you should learn at school and don't listen to what your parents tell you, and they try to cut out that critical thinking. It's a concern, and the next step actually is quite interesting as well, in that the UK government are proposing to lower the age of voting down to 16. So once you're 16, instead of 18, you can vote in the next election. And yet at the same time, under the new Online Safety Act, you have to be 18 before you can access information on the internet, which means in theory you're trapped into the school system, learning what they tell you, having to do exams on the narratives they give you, and you can vote before you can go on the internet to look for alternatives. And if that's not mind control, I don't know what is.
Phillipe, is this a woke agenda, exactly woke ideology, part of this indoctrination of children? Because in this UN proposed documents for education, they are talking a lot about this woke ideology.
A new expression of, we've seen historically as basically a form of Marxism, you know, this convincing one portion of the population that they're oppressed by another portion of the population. You know, historically that's been used to turn races against one another. I mean, we're seeing it in the LGBT community as well, where people are sort of being put up on a pedestal for identifying as something that prior to a few decades ago wasn't even a biological reality. So it's very dangerous to be teaching children this stuff, because also, you know, going back to that Lenin quote, children generally, they accept the realities of the world they're born into. And so if all they're surrounded by is propaganda in this direction, it's very, very hard. And I'd say the powers that be know that, to undo that propaganda and that brainwashing that they're subjected to. And it's been ramped up a lot since the days that you or I or Mark were in school. You know, I think there's propaganda littered throughout the school curriculum with the intention of creating what they call global citizens, people that are very much in line with the groupthink of organizations like the United Nations.
And on the end, they need to pack up everything with the final new religion, what is necessary for every human. And some saying this new religion is called transhumanism. Let's roll next clip.
We feel too afraid to have kids because we feel that we're heading towards civilization breakdown.
People under the age of 35 are more likely to report climate change as a reason not to have children.
I've decided not to have kids to do my part for climate change.
If I don't think the future is worth anything, then I'm not going to have children. If I think it is worth something, I will have children.
I think these ideas have spread like bad viruses, and there's been a lot of investment in promoting some extraordinarily weak ideas. sitting at the top of all of these very bad ideas is one giant one, which we can call anti-humanism. Transhumanism, the trans phenomenon, net zero, lockdowns, population reduction, all of these ideas are basically the ugly stepchildren of anti-humanism.
Is this transhumanism exactly anti-humanism, Mark?
Andrea, I find transhumanism hard to talk about. I prefer if Phil answered that one. It's the hardest part of looking into the future for me, because bear in mind, I'm in my 8th decade, and what I'm seeing for the future and for my children, and particularly my grandchildren, I find very hard to put into words. Maybe Phil will answer it better.
Yeah, Phil, you are younger. Maybe you will live long enough to see this transhumanism.
Yeah, lucky me. So, yeah, I would argue that it's, I mentioned earlier that it goes back. In fact, officially it was coined by Julian Huxley, brother of Aldous Huxley, in a paper, I believe, in the 1960s, the term transhumanism. And it's rooted ultimately, Huxley was a overt eugenicist, and eugenics, of course, has its roots in sort of Thomas Malthus's theories from centuries prior. But it's almost the merging of Malthusian eugenics with a form of Darwin's evolution. You get like this social Darwinism, whereby you get an entitled global elite that feel entitled to dictate the future of humanity. One, they get to dictate, they name themselves stewards of the earth and appoint themselves jurisdiction over the world. But also they feel entitled to control the direction of humanity. And, we're seeing that expressed through the entitlement to tamper with the human genome, to feel like they can upgrade the human immune system. And I think they almost see themselves as godlike figures at this point. These, Silicon Valley tech titans feel, for whatever reason, the hubris that they can upgrade humanity, that they can look at intelligent design and think, I can do that better. And I'm going to slap God in the face and I'm going to design something better than his design. They honestly seem to believe that. I think it's a very dangerous worldview, and it's growing in scope, and the salespeople for it aren't necessarily the usual suspects at the moment. But, this sounds like science fiction to somebody who's not come across it before, but we are very realistically moving into a world whereby we'll have technologies implanted inside our body, certainly by 2050, and maybe before that. That's the target to these people, whether that is, brain chips, or injectables, moving from an age of wearable technology to injectable technology. It's a roadmap that's been mapped out for a long time.
All these topics, what we spoke today, you put in one documentary called The Agenda. Can you tell our audience where people can find your documentary?
Sure. So the easiest place to find it is a URL, is theagendafilm.com. And that's sort of a hub for it. And at the moment, there's a YouTube embed there. And now when we launched the film, we didn't know how long, if at all, it was going to stay on YouTube. But at the moment, it's still there. So that's the primary embed there. You can also download the film there. And there is an option to, it's available for free. It's not behind a paywall, but there's an option to donate. So you can sort of recoup some of the immense costs that went into making this film over a couple of years. So there's an option to donate there or download the film and take it offline, because as we know, these things don't always last forever. So I think it's on borrowed time on YouTube. It's also available on Rumble if you know where to look for it. And it's been mirrored all over the internet, which is very encouraging to see.
Mark and Philip, thank you for your work. Thank you for your documentary. And it seems so that we are in the middle of a very interesting area in the history of humanity. And I hope that all of us, even you, Mark, and Philip, doesn't matter the difference in the age, will not see what is in front of us. I hope that we will continue to live in a normal, old normal way.
Well, yes, I'm not sure we'll ever live in an old normal way, the way I knew it. But I would leave you with the quote from Harari that comes at the top of the film. You won't be able to exist. You won't be able to exist unless you're connected to the net. And people should remember that if you're connected to the net, they can control you just as easily as you can use the net.
Final word, Philip.
Yes, equally, as I said right at the start of this interview, they're presenting all of this stuff like it's inevitable, but you still have free will, right? That's yours. And you can opt out of this, but it's going to take the individual. I don't even necessarily think the pushback for this is in sort of formal protests and demonstrations. It is, if you never listen to another word I say and you have no contact with me, if you go away as an individual and you start, once you see this agenda for what it is and you stop cooperating with it, because at this stage, so much of it still depends on your cooperation and manufacturing your consent, stop cooperating with it. And if enough people did that, I think they would really, even if it was inevitable in the long term, it would slow it down. And then the longer we can slow it down and delay it, the more people are going to see it for what it is. So I think that's our responsibility, the responsibility of everybody that can see what's happening, to do everything you can to hit the brakes on this lunacy.
Thank you for both of you, and have a huge success in the future.
Thank you, Andreas. Thank you for inviting us.
Evo, dragi narode, toplo preporučam da pogledate film The Agenda. I obratite pozornost oko sebe. Svaki od ovih segmenata se upravo ovog trenutka događa oko vas. Ugovor sa Svjetskom zdravstvenom organizacijom smo potpisali i IHR, International Health Regulation, nekoliko mjeseci prije. Prošle godine u 9. mjesecu je naš premijer u 5-minutnom govoru pred Ujedinjenim narodima se pohvalio kako je Hrvatska uspješna, čak 8. na svijetu u provođenju Agende 2030 i potpisao je Pact of the Future, a nikoga od oporbenih političara i novinara nije pitao o tome. Zatim, idući mjesec, dakle u listopadu, se odlučuje o nastavku implementiranja Central Bank Digital Currency. Iako naš guverner tvrdi da nam neće programirati novac, iako tvrdi da neće čuvati podatke, odnosno bit ćemo sigurni, znajte da tehnologija omogućava da se to u bilo kojem trenutku u budućnosti dogodi. Ako već neće, zašto odmah ne odbaciti tu tehnologiju? Postavlja se pitanje tko nam jamči u budućnosti da se to sve neće u jednom trenu promijeniti. Gledate svakodnevno i naslovnice novina koje govore o klimatskoj krizi, o katastrofi i o nečemu što nam ugrožava budućnost. Dakle, upravo te klimatske promjene koje slušamo redovito su proizvele da imamo ministarstvo za dekarbonizaciju, da provodimo zelenu tranziciju, to se zove zeleni plan Europske unije, da gradovi implementiraju 15-minutne gradove sa ciljem da se što manje vozite automobilom i kako bi proizveli što manje ugljičnog dioksida. Pazite, ugljičnog dioksida bez kojeg nema života na zemlji. Oni žele da ga proizvedemo što manje. Isto tako se suočavate sa visokim cijenama energije. Do sad je to vlada, kaže, subvencionirala. Mi znamo da nije vlada subvencionirala, vlada nema svoj novac, to je naš novac. A subvencionirala je tako da je uništavala HEP, na primjer, da bi mi svi zajedno dobili navodno jeftiniju energiju, a u stvarnosti na svaku cijenu te energije se dolazi karbonski porez, kojeg smo desetine milijarde u Europi platili i u sljedećem periodu planiraju preko 170 milijardi do 2050. godine platiti poreza za tu dekarbonizaciju. To će sve ići kroz cijenu energije. Energiju bez kojeg ne možemo živjeti. Zatim pogledajte nove planove, odnosno implementacije, edukacije od strane Ujedinjenih naroda. Pogledajte što unutra piše i što predviđaju za našu djecu. Također svjedočimo redovito da se odjednom pojavljuju opasne bolesti zbog kojih ubijaju stotine i tisuće naših svinja, a nikako da se riješimo neke bolesti i nikako da pronađemo način kako da spriječimo da ta bolest dolazi. Ako je uopće ima, jer nemojte zaboraviti da se testira onim istim PCR testovima s kojima su i nas testirali za vrijeme pandemije, a za koje je dokazano da je preko 90% krivo pozitivno. Dakle, vidjeli ste, sve o čemu govorimo u ovome se trenutno događa. Trenutno se i vodi rasprava da vam čitaju poruke, da skeniraju prije enkripcije, što bi naravno išlo u prilog tome da vam mogu kontrolirati i ono što razmišljate i ono što govorite i da se dogodi u konačnici ono što i sam Yuval Noah Harari, koji dolazi u Lisinski 23.10. kao prorok nove transhumanističke religije, da vam objasni upravo to i što javno govori, a to je da će algoritmi znati o nama toliko dovoljno da izbora neće ni biti potrebno, zato što će znati unaprijed za koga ćemo glasovati. I sve to će voditi artificial intelligence. Snimio sam emisiju o agentic state, to je dokument koji se dogodio u 25. svibnja ove godine, koji predviđa da sve poslove u javnoj administraciji, državnoj i lokalnoj, zamijeni takozvani agenti umjetne inteligencije. Dakle, čovjeka više neće biti. Postavlja se pitanje tko kontrolira tu umjetnu inteligenciju, ako je uopće više možemo kontrolirati. Dakle, vidite, sve se ovog časa događa, sve je tu. Da li je to sve slučajno? Predlažem vam da pogledate dokumentarac The Agenda i sami zaključite. Nadam se da ste bili zadovoljni s ovom emisijom i uskoro se vidimo u idućoj epizodi Slobodni.